Assalamualaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Talha, for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces on screen today. I'm delighted to moderate the session today with such a distinguished panel. Let me introduce them quickly, but we do want to make the session as interactive as possible. So do feed in your questions in the chat, and we'll try and accommodate as many as we can, time permitting, towards the end of the session. Let me continue with the introductions first. We have today joining us from Melbourne, Australia, Dean Hezekiah, who is ACCA's Policy and Insights Manager for the Asia and Pacific region. He has a background in academic consulting, audit, and project management, with expertise in aligning policies and courses to regulatory standards. A fellow of ACCA, Dean is passionate about exploring the interplay between technology and humanity. Welcome, Dean. Next, Agnes K. Vaitai is the Director of Great Glory Investment Corporation, with an extensive career spanning 45 years in the financial sector across international markets. She holds governance roles at the World Economic Forum, Global Future Council, Chapter Zero Alliance, which hosts 34 climate governance initiatives worldwide, Global Reporting Initiative, and the Hong Kong Institute of Directors. Good to have you with us, Agnes. Michael Wood has over 20 years of experience in sustainability and climate-related fields, with expertise in decarbonization, climate resilience, energy, and natural capital. He has worked across diverse sectors, including energy, resources, industrials, infrastructure, and finance. He is deeply committed to advancing sustainability and climate resilience in the industry. So, as most of you know, we've heard this morning a lot about the regulatory landscape in Pakistan. Of course, Shamshad added the international flavor to it as well. But we want to now expand a bit more to the region and the Asia-Pacific experience. So let me start with you, Dean, first, and ask what type of regulatory incentives are being provided in the Asia-Pacific region, which are accelerating ESG integration across the various countries. And related to that, what are some of the policy initiatives that you see coming up in the next few years?
Thank you, Sadia, and thanks and a good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to PICG for having me. That's a great question. So, speaking to the sorts of regulations and incentives that we see, I can reflect briefly on some of the regulatory interventions and policy interventions that we see here in Australia, and reflect on, I guess, some of the impacts that we're also seeing through those regulations. One of the scenes of regulatory development here in Australia is the construction sector. So we're seeing a lot of incentives in that space, in the direction of green investing. Here in Australia, we have a lot of incentives around, for example, solar. And it's something that the government has been pushing for the last, I think it's over a decade now. So we have this concept of all electric homes, and it's heavily subsidized by the government. So when you come to Australia, you'll see a lot of houses with solar panels. The government has been subsidizing electric homes for a while now. And it's not just the capital investment, but also the electric homes have the ability to feed energy back into the grid, and the government once again provides incentives there. So the energy bill is going to be a lot less as a result of that. Staying in that space, the government has also regulated the actual level or quality of housing. Homes now are required to be at a level of 7-star rating. What this actually does is it creates an environment where the houses are not using up as much energy. So there's a lot less strain on the environment. So those are two significant pieces of regulation here in Australia. One thing I also want to reflect on briefly is I guess, pivoting over to the transport sector. And I want to actually go over to China here because that's another region in the Asia Pacific space. You may be aware that the EV market in China is actually quite active. And once again, we see the impact of government subsidizing and regulating things, but we're also seeing there in China the impact of competition because they've created a very competitive environment. So in China, what we have here is a situation where it's actually quite cost effective as a result of all the incentive for the common person to own an electric vehicle. So that's actually going to reduce that environmental footprint quite significantly. In fact, I was having a conversation quite recently with a friend of mine who is based in Beijing, and he was reflecting on the fact that, you know, in China, it's actually cost effective to own an EV. Here in Australia, we're still at the point where even though we see a fair few EVs, Sadia, it's quite aspirational to own them. So that gives you a sense of how significant these incentives and regulatory developments can be potentially. Coming over to some of the initiatives or the incentives that we see that are potentially having an impact in the region. I just want to reflect briefly, if I may, on some of the developments in two other countries in the Asia Pacific region, Indonesia and Malaysia. We have a lot of incentives and a push for biodiesel. That is another source of energy that's quite friendly to the environment. As you can tell, all the examples that I've mentioned are probably in the energy space, and I think that's the scene of a lot of exciting innovation. So Indonesia and Malaysia have made significant progress in terms of biodiesel, and that's an exciting space to watch. I want to pause here. Back to you, Sadia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. I was reading recently that one of the major industrial groups in Pakistan is bringing in the Chinese EV model. So let's see how the regulatory infrastructure keeps up with that. So apart from the regulatory ecosystem, the institutional investors have a very important role to play, I think, in advancing ESG integration. So Agnes, let me turn to you. What shifts are you seeing in how institutional investors are evaluating ESG performance across the investing companies?
Thank you, Sadia, and thank you to PICG for having me today. Institutional investors are, as you know, asset owners or asset managers, and the latter respond to regulations, their investors' demand, and some political influences. So the large asset managers are interested in companies with market capitalization of $1 billion or more. With Hong Kong, we have 2,600 listed issuers, and only about 500 of our companies meet that sort of market cap criteria. So I note that Pakistan has been mentioned as one of the 17 jurisdictions in the ISSB recent report. I'm also proud to say that Hong Kong is the first jurisdiction that adopted the ISSB standards, which makes it easier for institutional investors to gauge the global portfolio companies' ESG performance, because now you have everything that is more comparable from 2026. All the data are more comparable, they're more comprehensive, and you have an international baseline benchmark to work with. And therefore, institutional investors with this increased transparency, they can more easily assess the sustainability value, long-term value creation of their portfolio companies, as well as they can sharpen their focus of corporate engagement and leading to maybe slightly different voting outcomes. So in the past, they've been heavily reliant on rating agencies and voluntary disclosure channels such as CDP. By the way, you have to, as a corporate, pay CDP to fill up a very long questionnaire. But from 2026 onwards, all these data will be quite accessible. And I'm sure Michael will be able to shed a lot more light on reporting. So two very quick points that I want to say is that, of course, we know that in March, the US SEC backtracked. They say that they wouldn't want to enforce the ESG disclosure rules that they just put forth a year back. And many of the asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, and Northern Trust, they've exited the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance and Climate Action 100 Plus. Now, this is not without consequence because some of the foundations already have pulled out of their mandate from BlackRock, for instance. So despite all these backlashing in the US and in the EU, you have the simplification of disclosure rules, Asia is actually moving forward. Asian asset managers are really driven by long-term capital preservation and growth. They understand that good ESG performance leads to business value creation and the future social license to operate. So the growing demand is for the leading asset managers to really think about how to integrate ESG performance into financial performance in the research. And my very final example is China's Social Security Fund, which is like 420 billion US dollars. They started pivoting, they started piloting requests for proposals in 2020 for responsible investing. And in the 2023 report, they say that they really want to emphasize sustainable investing, which will fit and align with the nation's goal of carbon peaking in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2060.
Thank you, Agnes. That's really informative. And as you rightly mentioned, even the institutional investors are dependent on accurate and reliable reporting structure. So let me turn to you, Michael. Which sectors in your region or globally are making the most progress in integrating sustainability reporting into their core business processes? Any one particular leading example that comes to your mind?
Sure. Thank you so much. And hopefully you can hear me nice and clear. I'm based in Qatar. You probably can see this bright light behind me. And as Agnes, that's the sun, by the way. It's very hot here today. But what Agnes was saying, I really resonated with. I come from Australia, where short-term politics dominates, and some of the issues that Dean was mentioning around infrastructure decisions, particularly around EVs, for example, just don't happen in a timely manner versus places like the GCC where I'm based. And there is that long-term sovereign wealth fund-based viewpoint and investments that are made, particularly around long-term infrastructure and benefits back to society. So I'm going to talk through just around reporting. Probably going to have a bit of slightly polarizing view around reporting. Reporting is an output of a process. Reporting is not going to solve global issues. It's very good for visibility, accountability, but when has reporting ever solved the most complex issues in the world, like climate, like poverty, like natural capital, like circularity? It's not going to happen. But what it's very good for is around informing capital markets, like we have mentioned. So there's a number of markets around the world that have been pushing this envelope, and in the GCC particularly as well, there is an increased appetite for ISSB, IFRS reporting to inform capital decisions. But what the key message I really want people to take away is that ESG reporting, sustainability reporting can act as a catalyst for you. It's not the endpoint destination at all. It's the end of a process to tell a story. That's really it. What's really more important for you as you're developing these reports, this is around how you change capital decision-making processes internally. This is around how sustainability is valued. I mean, we live in a linear society right now where less than 70% of all global material is reused or repurposed. So 93% of virgin material is being consumed and disposed of. That's not a sustainable society by any stretch. We've already triggered a 1.5 degree future last year. So clearly what we're doing here, and reporting's been around for decades and decades, it's not the answer, it's part of a solution set. So that's the pessimist side of me. The optimist side of me is that there is a lot of green shoots out there, and through the ISSB, we are seeing, like the European Union, they really pushed the envelope. They probably went too far on the regulations, let's be honest. Regulations are there, they're meant to set the battery limits of where sectors and economies should perform, and then the free market should just decide the most efficient way to get to that endpoint. So they've had to relax that. GCC, where I'm based, has some rulings and regulations coming through the markets, as well as many other countries like Australia and through the Asian markets. But in terms of sectors, I'll probably focus on that. When I think about the sectors, the primary and you've got your consumption-based players in the economy. I would always look to agriculture as the sector to get examples from. They face the most pressures. They're in the most dynamic market you can possibly ask for, and they face issues all the time, whether that be natural resource availability, whether that be climate, whether that be supply chain issues. In terms of resiliency around sustainability and value chains, in terms of the need to know exactly what your customer is asking for, a lot of the lessons learned, I find, come from the agricultural sector. And I'll provide some examples later on as we go through this panel conversation. So I'll stop there. In terms of reporting, it's very important. Use it as a tool. It's not the endpoint. That's really what I want to communicate to everybody. There's a real fetish at the moment on ISSB, IFRS reporting. That's excellent. It's a tool. Use it to your advantage. And this is all around how we make smarter decisions, how to value sustainability more effectively, and let's start directing capital in the right direction.
Thank you, Michael. You rightly mentioned that reporting is a tool. And one of the tools is towards accessing climate finance. We heard a bit about adaptation finance as well this morning. So let me turn back to you, Agnes. What innovations or instruments in climate finance, e.g. carbon markets, are showing the most promise these days?
Nadia, I would say that there are three channels. First of all, of course, there was a mention about GSS bonds and notes. Those are your green and sustainability linked bonds and notes, and also loans. So Hong Kong and China has been the world's leading issuer. I won't bore you with all the numbers, but the cumulative issuance of sustainable debt by China has reached over $555 billion, which is top 4. The other ones are like, the first one is supranational, because they're supranational, of course, they're big. And then the US and France. But of these, what we need would be a common, the green taxonomy. And China has a common ground taxonomy, which is like the EU's green taxonomy and the 2 national taxonomy that have a common denomination. It is not a taxonomy on its own merit, but it is like a common understanding. And so I understand that Pakistan has been developing your green taxonomy, which is very encouraging. All the ASEAN countries are, but China has also developed a blue taxonomy in November 2024, and the related loans have been granted by Shanghai Development Bank soon after that. So, but all these, when you think about the total size of GSS plus about $6 trillion cumulatively outstanding, that's only 4.5% of the global total bonds outstanding of $133 trillion. So we have a lot of room to grow. And for Pakistan, because you're very much keen on the diversity and helping women, so orange bonds, some of the issues have been very successful in Singapore. So that is something that Pakistan may be able to leverage on and think about and capitalize on. The second aspect is, I just heard from your central bank that blended finance is being one of the areas, and definitely very, very important, because IFC of the World Bank and Asian Development Banks have been committing to climate adaptation and mitigation of developing economies. The Asian Development Bank commits $100 billion to climate finance by 2030, and IFC, out of its own account, now this is not gathering money from other institutions, but out of IFC's own account, have already put in $18.5 billion as of June 2024 to climate-related projects. Sadia, you mentioned carbon markets. And so let me just focus on voluntary carbon markets. Thanks to Singapore for co-facilitating Article 6 in COP26, we have now a very clear roadmap of how voluntary markets can be interoperable. And we know that there are so many carbon markets already established in Asia, the first one being Singapore, and then Malaysia and Hong Kong in 2022, Indonesia and Thailand in 2023, and Japan is going to shift its voluntary market to a compliance-based system by 2026. Now, all these are only a very small fraction in terms of volume being traded compared to the largest market, which is in the US, expensive. And still expensive, in 2024 only traded 12.5 million metric tons of carbon. It's already traded 2/3 of all the world's global spot carbon credits. So this is something that perhaps Pakistan can also think about in terms of you have so many forests, you have so many mangroves along your coast that can sequestrate carbon and produce carbon credits. However, a word of caution is that because we all developing countries like Pakistan has a growing population and you're growing at a GDP rate of over 3% per year, you need your coal reliance is 53%. Which is pretty good, but then for a country that size to grow, and there's not enough renewable energy yet, so you still have to rely on some coal. And I would say that keep your good quality carbon credits to fulfill your NDCs. But all these that I mentioned, my last point is that it all needs know-how and data. I heard about mentioned several times of capacity building. And one thing to maybe consider is like Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which is our pseudo central bank in Hong Kong. The main one, the real one is of course People's Bank of China. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority has a central repository of all the bank's portfolio companies' ESG data. They have all that knowledge in one place. So that would make it easier for them to help these smaller companies to get onto GSS, debt financing, and so on. So I'll stop here, Sadia.
Thank you, Agnes. Lots of lessons there for Pakistan for sure. Let me just stay on the topic of financial institutions. And Dean, let me turn to you and ask, what do you think are the importance of other types of financial VC funds, DFIs, impact investors in building ESG-aligned business ecosystem?
Thank you for that question, Sadia. I think it's a great place to reflect. I think the investment and the VC community is hugely important because they essentially fund the sustainability agenda with their capital, and that's a significant role. And I think what a statement that captures the role of investors and the VC community for me is, it's almost like they're voting which ideas carry the day, and they're bringing their capital and they're voting with that. And so that's not an insignificant role. Why I'm excited about, and I want to tie this back to the sustainability reporting and the ISSB framework that's just come out recently that we're all embracing, and including Pakistan. Why it excites me, reflecting on the investment and the VC spaces. They have, sustainability reporting is like this big light. It's like a clarifying opportunity. So we're going to get to see a lot of things for the first time. The investors, those that have the appetite for this information, they're going to have a closer look at their investee companies, and potentially we can see them reallocating capital along ESG lines, because there is an investment community out there that's ESG conscious. And so when they get this information from, this new reporting framework, they're going to be able to say, hey, I would like to reallocate my capital. So that's actually a hugely significant benefit that we're going to get from the sustainability reporting for the investors. But I think that investors also play a hugely significant role just in terms of the values they bring to their investee organizations. I was recently looking at a report where venture capital organizations, after taking over an investee company, and then we look at the performance of that investee company down the track, you realize that the performance on certain ESG dimensions are much improved. So they have significant sway in creating that consciousness within the business community, and that's not a role that that's to be scoffed at. It's actually a hugely significant role, because what we're trying to establish in this moment is a significant culture shift in how businesses think about value. And I think they have a hugely significant role to play in at least embedding or transferring or communicating those ideas, those values, and those sustainable values that we want to embrace. So they have significant sway as far as that goes. I think that's the role that investors play over and above their capitals. I just wanted to leave it at that. Thank you, Sadia.
Thanks, Dean. So let's see what kind of impact that kind of messaging is actually having in the real world. So Michael, any particular regional projects or initiatives that stand out as successfully integrating decarbonization and climate resilience into the strategy?
Yeah, sure. Just for a bit of context for the audience as well, I'm not sure if the folk on the call are aware of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This came out from the Financial Stability Board in the mid-2010s. I was fortunate enough to write some of the scenario analysis guidance around that. And honestly, I think the early adopters of the TCFD, and now that a large material part of that has been absorbed in the ISSB, the way it requires entities to report is incredibly value adding. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the process is understanding your risks, understanding the opportunities. That feeds through your strategic planning processes to understand your vulnerabilities and exposures to that change. And once you understand the level of that change based on where you're going and where you need to be, there's a delta there that needs to be closed. And you close that through capital programs, different interventions, whatever they will be. And that's been an excellent process to understand exposures down to the balance sheet. Has anyone done it perfectly? No, because it's a dynamic, it's an ever-evolving landscape, but a lot of entities have adopted that, including governments as well. But if I just focus on a couple of sectors and regions, I mean, first of all, I need to acknowledge that Pakistan is incredible in terms of climate resilience. By nature of the challenges that the country faces, it's had to have that adaptive capacity better than most. It's interesting to see the whole value chain though, and one point I want to raise is that there's a very insular view of managing climatic risks and decarbonisation at this point. So manage that within the company itself or the country. Where the opportunity lies is in the value chain. Everybody's got the same issue at the same time. If you have the smarts to be able to leverage your inbound and outbound investments, relationships, and so forth, you can address these with a shared view, and you can de-risk it in a shared way as well. But when we look at, I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. An interesting one, I worked with an agricultural company, I'm going back to them again. But they use this information, they use climatic model information to understand where they could buy plots of land in the future for different varietals of product. So they're actually using that information now to make strategic decisions around investments. And this is going out to 20 to 30 years. I just recently worked with an oil and gas company where we looked at a whole enterprise view of how resilient their infrastructure is to climatic change. Changes in humidity and temperature have immediate operational impacts, but also longer term, their customer base will change and their product mix will change as well. So working on a process there to understand how vulnerable our portfolio was is a huge exercise. But that starts with management, and that starts with risk. And then from there, you can build it into planning processes. So, I mean, there's just a couple of examples. It really depends on the sector, but there are a couple of key learnings that I would say that if people are studying on the climate impact journey, particularly under Section 2 of the ISSB, it's really, you've got to have a sound understanding of the scenarios and models, because they really do make a difference as to understand how that impacts your business, your process, your commodity, or your region. You need to think about it from a risk perspective, and very quickly it flips. Starts with risk, but very quickly moves to opportunities. And I've seen that time and time again working with management, is that yes, it is a risk process to start with, but very quickly there's new market opportunities, there's new ways to make money, which is very exciting for everybody. And then there's leveraging the value chain, which is an incredibly important thing. All those things though, there's a couple of things that need to go right, and Agnes raised this around carbon markets. We just need a carbon signal. There needs to be a global carbon price. Without that, I'm going to pick on the oil and gas sector again. Yes, there's all these great things around decarbonisation, but let's be honest, less than 10% of all capital that's been disposed by that sector is going towards low carbon investments. It's not material, and it's not going to change the needle for the oil and gas sector. It's less than 5% in most cases for most entities, despite all the commitments around net zero and so forth. So there's material gaps between words and action. And without a proper price signal in markets and capital markets and stronger decisions around policy, I do have my doubts around, I don't think we'll get to 1.5 degree future, to be honest. That's already been exceeded. A 2 degree future is more than likely, but we're heading on a pathway from a climate perspective that's 3 degrees plus, which will have devastating impacts. So call to action there is just, hopefully there's some points out of there. We still do have time, and the information is out there. It's just how you use that information and how you get access to it.
Thank you, Dean. And behind all the success stories, of course, is a very important element of the correct skill set. So let me turn to you, Agnes, and find out how are companies building internal ESG capabilities to ensure long-term integration. And that is, I think, a really important point as we move from policy to execution.
Thank you, Sadia. What Michael talked about of this significant gap between words and action really hit me, because I believe that mindset and behavior change takes a long time, and it needs both the carrot and the stick to make it happen. So I've been doing sustainability training at board level since 2012, and for the longest time I didn't see the needle move. So frustrated. And I really commend PICG for this conference, because you need this sort of conference to get that message out there, and also to include the non-converted. But coming back to skills, capacity building at a board and management level, right? Because business leaders really need to know enough. Like Michael said, they need to know a little bit about the scenarios behind all these assessments. They really need to know enough to ask the right questions, and also discern whether the replies are valid. And if the management or consultants are giving them technical jargons, like I was a consultant before, and it's very easy to fall into that trap, get them to add clarity and provide cases. And so that you as a business leader can get to ask the further questions which are decision useful. So in terms of training, I heard that Pakistan already has a platform, which is the ESG Sustain portal, which is tremendously helpful. But also, I would suggest that follow the example of Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Regulators can mandate ESG training and even provide some tax or reimbursement incentives for taking relevant training, like Hong Kong does. So we know all these digital disclosure platforms and so on, but what about the projects, the green projects? Who knows how to run them? Who knows how to calibrate carbon credits from them? So being proficient in these ESG sector-specific knowledge, particularly the taxonomies and the terminologies and all that, there's one platform that really helps, and that is the CASI platform, the Capacity Building Alliance of Sustainable Investment. It's an international cooperation platform that offers, that was launched in December 2023, and it offers capacity building for projects, particularly for the emerging markets and developing economies. And this was spearheaded by Dr. Ma Jun, who once was with the People's Bank of China. So, President Xi Jinping is also really big on what we Chinese call Silver Mountain and Gold Mountain, and those just means you have really good resources and very good sustainable environment for future businesses and future people, generations to thrive. So in sum, change of mindset and capacity building are the two key things.